The air over Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona, always carried the smell of grit and jet fuel, a combination that Major Evelyn Witch Riley knew better than the scent of her own home. She hated the nickname, Witch. It had been handed down to her by Colonel Marcus Thorne, the wing commander, a man whose respect was earned only by those who looked and acted exactly like he did, stern, male, and old school. For Evelyn, a pilot who flew the famously ugly, notoriously tough A-10, Thunderbolt II, the Warthog, it was a title meant to dismiss her methodical precision and her refusal to smile her way through a hostile briefing room. Evelyn wasn't a charm officer. She was a close air support, KS, specialist. Her job was to fly low, fly slow, and deliver the fury of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, a 7-barreled machine gun that fired shells the size of a wine bottle, directly onto enemy positions, often just yards from friendly troops. She had saved more lives than anyone else in the 355th Wing, but none of that mattered to Thorne. He saw her as an administrative problem, not a warrior. Today was the last mission before the unit rotated out, and the briefing room was tense. Colonel Thorne stood at the head of the long table, his starched uniform and polished boots reflecting the harsh fluorescent light. He stared straight past Evelyn, addressing the men as if she were a piece of furniture. "This is a critical KS run, gentlemen. Blue team is pinned down in a fortified valley pocket. We need clean, close fire. Pilot, this is your last chance to show me why we spent so much on your training before your reassignment paperwork is finalized." The word reassignment hung in the air, a thinly veiled dismissal. Evelyn wasn't being promoted or transferred. She was being shuffled to a desk job, an operation Thorne called managing her aggressive tendencies. He was effectively ending her flying career because she made him uncomfortable. Evelyn did not flinch. She just stared at the map. "Hammer 5-1 is prepped, Colonel. I'll be running the usual 3-pass pattern, 50 feet above the ridgeline. I will not compromise the ground team's safety for altitude." She spoke calmly, every word simple and direct, optimized for the high-stress environment. Thorne leaned in, his voice dropping to a sneer. "Don't be a hero, Riley. The Warthog is tough, but it's not invincible. If you lose that bird, it's a million paperwork hours I have to explain. I need that airframe back, intact. You follow my explicit orders this time, or your career is dust." The injustice was a tight, cold knot in her stomach. He was prioritizing the plane over the mission, and over her life, simply because he wanted her gone without a fuss. Evelyn looked down at her flight suit, adjusted her helmet, and quietly walked out. She wasn't fighting for Thorne's approval anymore. She was fighting for the soldiers she hadn't met yet, the ones pinned down counting on the sound of her engines. That, and the sheer, beautiful power of the GAU-8, was all the justice she needed right now. She climbed into Hammer 5-1, her plane, the toughest, ugliest, most magnificent machine she knew, and prepared to fly. The flight was long, silent, and fueled by Evelyn's internal resolve. She was flying into a fictional deployment zone known only by its operational code, Sector 4 Alpha. The ground was rocky, unforgiving, and painted in the dull, hot colors of a distant desert. The sun was dipping, casting long, menacing shadows across the valley where Blue Team was hiding. The radio crackled, full of static and urgency. "Hammer 5-1, this is Blue Lead. We are taking heavy fire from the northern ridge." "Repeat. Northern ridge. We have 3 wounded. Need immediate suppression. Over." Evelyn banked Hammer 5-1 hard. The Warthog didn't fly like a sleek fighter jet. It flew like a cinder block with wings steady and stubborn. But that stability was its strength. It meant she could hold a bead on a target while everything around her shook. As she approached the target area, the valley opened up beneath her, revealing the desperate, chaotic scene. She dropped low, lower than regulation. Knowing Thorne's orders were irrelevant the moment lives were on the line, she ignored the altitude warning light. She was close enough to see the enemy positions clearly, trenches dug into the rock, reinforced and bristling with heavy machine guns. "Blue Lead, I see the heat signature. Running past 1, engaging target at 12 o'clock. Stand by for impact." The GAU-8 Avenger, the Warthog's cannon, came alive with its signature terrifying roar, a sound that, to ground troops, meant salvation. It ripped apart the northern ridge in a devastating, controlled spray of fire. Evelyn's aim was surgical. She walked the rounds right over the enemy positions, not a single shell close to the friendly troops. She banked for pass 2 when the warning lights flared. Not standard anti-aircraft fire, but something heavier. She heard the distinct thump of a launching rocket, a small, sudden sound before the massive, roaring trail of smoke filled her peripheral vision. A surface-to-air missile. Sam. Sam, launch. Sam, launch! The automated voice screamed in her ear. Evelyn threw the Warthog into a violent evasion maneuver, dropping countermeasures. The missile locked onto the heat flares, but a secondary, older anti-aircraft gun opened up from a flank she hadn't spotted. A string of explosive rounds slammed into her right engine. The turbine died instantly, followed by a gut-wrenching shudder throughout the airframe. The cockpit was filled with alarm bells and the smell of burning oil and hydraulic fluid. I'm hit! Right engine is gone, heavy structural damage. Blue lead, I need 5 more minutes to finish suppression. I can still fly. Her voice remained level, devoid of panic. She could have aborted immediately and tried to glide out, but the ground team was still pinned. She lined up for pass 3, the final, crucial run. She squeezed the trigger on the dying plane, delivering the last, decisive burst of depleted uranium shells. The northern ridge went silent. Blue lead, fire suppressed. Get out of there! I'm going down! She yelled, the last word strained. The remaining engine sputtered. The controls went loose, and the metal beneath her screamed in protest. Evelyn saw the ground troops running for cover, safe. Her mission was complete. She reached for the ejection handle. Back at the command center at Davis-Monthan, the mission control room was a cacophony of panicked voices and flashing red lights. Colonel Thorne watched the telemetry feed for Hammer, 5-1, Evelyn's A-10, flicker, and die. The radar signature vanished just as the ground team confirmed their escape. She's gone, the senior controller stated grimly. Structural integrity compromised, total power loss. No visible parachute on the satellite feed. Thorne did not hesitate. There was no moment of concern, only professional irritation. Pilot is officially designated killed in action, KIA, he announced, his voice booming and final. He turned to his operations officer. Cancel all search and rescue SAR assets for that sector. I am not risking a multi-million-dollar extraction team for a confirmed loss. A younger officer, Captain Davies, spoke up, his face pale. Sir, the coordinates show a survivable ejection altitude. We haven't had visual confirmation of the crash site. We have to send in the Starbirds. It's regulation. Thorne glared at him, his face tight with controlled rage. Regulation, Captain? Regulation says I don't lose a second jet trying to recover a failed pilot who ignored direct orders. Riley was careless. She pushed the envelope and she paid the price. I warned her not to be a hero, and now she's a liability. I'm not complicating this with a search. His decision was immediate, ruthless, and born entirely out of his deep-seated disrespect for Evelyn. By declaring her KIA and canceling SAR immediately, he ensured no one would ever question why the recovery was called off. He could file the incident as pilot error and quietly bury the reassignment problem forever. The commander said they'd never see her again. The words echoed through the room. The base went into quiet mourning. Evelyn's locker was cleared out. Her empty chair in the briefing room was a dark symbol of loss. The official report stated she had perished in the line of duty, a hero who sacrificed her life to save her comrades. It was a neat, clean lie. No one knew that the commander had abandoned both the pilot and the airframe before she was even confirmed dead. The injustice was now a fact, sealed in a filing cabinet. Evelyn did not die. The Warthog, true to its stubborn nature, had held together just long enough. She ejected successfully but landed hard, far behind enemy lines. The following weeks were a brutal testament to her strength. Alone, wounded, and without a working radio, she survived on instinct, relying on her survival training. Meanwhile, back at Davis-Monthan, Colonel Thorne had the airframe officially classified as a total combat loss, irretrievable. He spent his time polishing his explanation, holding meetings about budget cuts and pushing his agenda for newer, sleeker and less messy fighter jets. He felt a smug satisfaction. Evelyn was gone, and his control over the wing was absolute. However, in the sprawling, dusty maintenance hangars of DM, a few dedicated mechanics, the ones who truly understood the soul of the A-10, felt the loss of Hammer 5-1 deeply. Chief Master Sergeant Alistair Finch, a grizzled, old-school airframe specialist who had helped build her engine, refused to close the file. He knew the A-10 was built to survive. "That plane doesn't just fall apart," he'd grumble to his small crew. And Major Riley's no quitter. Al, operating in the shadows and leveraging decades of military bureaucracy, managed to use an obscure decommissioned asset recovery budget to fund a private, unofficial retrieval of the crash site. Thorne would never see the invoices among the thousands of line items in the quarterly budget. Al's team, a skeleton crew of loyalists, worked off the clock, for free, driven by respect for the pilot and the sheer, almost mythical resilience of the Warthog. 2 months after the incident, Evelyn finally walked out of the jungle and into a friendly observation post, gaunt and scarred, but alive. The debriefing was short and classified. Her return caused a quiet panic in Thorne's office. He tried to control the narrative, framing her return as a miracle that validated his decision not to risk a SAR operation, claiming he knew she had the strength to survive. Evelyn, emotionally exhausted, was immediately grounded and assigned to an administrative recovery ward on the base. She learned the truth quickly. The SAR mission had been canceled before she was confirmed dead. The commander had written her off. The fire in her chest was no longer fear. It was cold, pure rage at the betrayal. The following weeks were agonizing. Evelyn was a ghost on the base, seen but ignored, a walking reminder of Thorne's flawed judgment. She was officially a survivor, but practically she was a problem to be contained until she could be medically discharged. Then, the rumors started. Low, insistent whispers among the night shift maintenance crews. People were reporting a large, damaged airframe moving in and out of the restricted desert airspace west of the base. An airframe that sounded like an A-10, but only ran on one engine, sputtering and struggling, yet maintaining flight. The story spread like wildfire, the Phantom Warthog. The sightings were impossible. Hammer 5-1 was officially a wreck in a foreign wasteland. Yet the spotters described the damage too precisely. A gaping hole where the right engine used to be, scorch marks along the tail fin, and the distinctive chipped paint of Hammer 5-1's old squadron logo. The truth was hidden deep within the sprawling, dust-covered Annex 7. Al Finch and his crew, working with unauthorized parts and sheer mechanical will, had managed the impossible. They had retrieved the wreckage of Hammer 5-1. The jet had been transported in pieces, disguised as scrap metal, and reassembled in secret. It was a Frankenstein monster of an aircraft, torn apart by enemy fire, patched up with jury-rigged components, running on guts and one temperamental engine. Evelyn found Al in the annex one cold night. He simply opened the hangar door. There it sat, Hammer 5-1. It was terrifyingly beautiful. Patches of dull gray primer covered massive holes, cables were exposed, and the smell of raw hydraulic fluid was overpowering. It looked less like a plane and more like a barely contained explosion, but its chassis was whole. "She's alive, Major," Al whispered, his eyes shining with respect. "Just like you. Took the hits, but the core holds. We did it for the mission, not the colonel. We couldn't let a survivor like that, pilot or plane, be written off by an arrogant fool." Evelyn touched the scarred, pitted metal of her plane. She realized the truth wasn't in her testimony. It was in the titanium bathtub of the Warthog, the cockpit that had saved her life. This impossible wreck was the physical evidence of Thorne's lie. The plane was tough enough to be retrieved, but the commander chose the easy way out. The plane had to fly one more time, not for war, but for justice. The following Saturday was the commander's annual inspection, a pompous affair designed to show off Thorne's leadership to visiting dignitaries. It was a full-dress ceremony on the tarmac, complete with a flyover of the newest, sleekest fighter jets, a clear statement that the A-10 was a relic of the past. Evelyn had a plan, one that risked everything, her freedom, her future, and perhaps her life. She coordinated with Al and his crew. They had a short window while the base was distracted by the ceremony. Al had fueled Hammer 5-1 and managed to bypass the electronic flight logging system. Dressed in her flight suit, Evelyn slipped past the guards and into Annex 7. She climbed into the cockpit of the damaged A-10. The controls were stiff. The single engine roared to life with a metallic shriek, and the whole airframe shook like a wet dog. "Hammer 5-1 is rolling," she announced to an empty frequency, a nod to the old abandoned call sign. She taxied the massive, broken aircraft onto a secondary runway. The sheer noise of the single engine, louder than 1,000 freight trains, should have alerted someone. But all attention was on the ceremony across the field. She pushed the throttle forward. The scarred warthog struggled, fighting the desert air, its wings shuddering. It felt unstable, dangerous, but Evelyn wrestled it into the sky, pulling it up just above the hangars. Her goal was not evasion, it was spectacle. She flew the impossible broken warthog, the plane declared irretrievable, right into the restricted airspace and circled directly over the main tarmac. The ceremony instantly dissolved into chaos. The roaring sound of the broken, one-engined A-10 drowned out the brass band and the commander's speech. Dignitaries shielded their ears, looking up in disbelief at the ugly, battered phantom that shouldn't exist. Colonel Thorne, standing ramrod straight in the center of the tarmac, turned white. He recognized the silhouette, the smoke trail, and the massive, distinct damage. It was Hammer 5-1, the plane he had abandoned, piloted by the woman he had tried to write off as KIA. The plane was torn apart, yet clearly, impossibly alive. Evelyn descended, bringing the crippled A-10 in for a landing on the main ceremonial runway, just feet from where Thorne was standing. The landing was rough, a perfect controlled crash rather than a descent, sending dust and grit across the polished boots of the dignitaries. As the single engine sputtered and died, the silence that followed was deafening. Evelyn cut the power, released the canopy, and climbed down the ladder, moving slowly but deliberately. Her face was set, unyielding, a picture of quiet fury. She walked directly toward Colonel Thorne, who stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning panic. The wreckage of Hammer 5-1, a testament to resilience and survival, sat smoking behind her. It was evidence, too big and loud to ignore. "Colonel Thorne," Evelyn said, her voice clear and carrying over the sudden quiet. She didn't salute. "Hammer 5-1 mission complete. Pilot and airframe were viable for recovery. The twist wasn't just the plane's return. It was the recovery of the flight data recorder, FDR. Al and his crew had salvaged the core flight computer, which contained the exact time Evelyn had confirmed her survival and ejection, and the exact time Thorne had canceled the SAR mission. The flight computer proved the commander had waited less than 3 minutes before abandoning her to certain death, merely to avoid bureaucratic hassle. The resulting investigation was swift and brutal. The spectacle of the impossible flight, the testimony of Al Finch and his team, and the physical evidence of the torn-apart yet alive A-10 proved everything. The plane, the tough, low-tech, undervalued warthog, had returned to deliver justice. Colonel Thorne was relieved of command on the spot, arrested for reckless endangerment, dereliction of duty, and official misconduct. He was led away in disgrace, his career in dust. Evelyn stood watching him go, not with triumph, but with deep satisfaction. She didn't seek revenge. She sought truth. She looked back at Hammer 5-1, the plane that embodied her own spirit, a little ugly, deeply scarred, but built of titanium and pure refusal to quit. The nickname Witch no longer stung. It became a mark of honor, a symbol of the pilot who survived the battlefield and the betrayal of command. Major Evelyn Riley was promoted, her career no longer in question, and she was assigned to command the unit dedicated to maintaining the warthogs, ensuring no pilot or plane was ever left behind again. She had found her redemption, not through heroism, but by exposing the truth that should never have been buried.